So last week, the class we gave was a general introduction to prayer. And this week we'll start going through the Siddur, explain different prayers. And we're not going to go through the whole page by page. We're going to go through different parts of the davening. So we'll start with page 5 in the Siddur.
When are we supposed to start Machzor?
Machzor will also be in this class. I'll do it maybe next week and the week after. We have 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, so I'll probably do that, yeah. Okay. So page 5 is the beginning of the day. Wake up in the morning, and the first thing we do is we say Moda Ani, which means Moda means I'm saying thank you to Hashem. Hashem, who is Chai V'Kayam, living and eternal King, and thank you for restoring my neshama. And you do it with faithfulness, and Hashem, your faithfulness is great. What these words mean is when a person goes to sleep, there's an expression in Gemara that sleeping is like a 60th of death. What does that mean? It means that when a person, God forbid, passes away, it means the soul leaves the body. When a person goes to sleep, it's the 60th of that, which means the soul leaves the body, but not completely, just to a certain extent. And the soul is less connected to the body. That's what it means when we sleep, we're not conscious. So when we wake up, it means that our soul comes back to the body in full consciousness. And we're thanking Hashem. What we mean by saying faithful is like you give someone something and you say, could you hold this for me for a few days? I'll be back in a few days. And they give it back to you and everything is okay. It's not broken. It's not damaged. It was well taken care of. So that means they're being honest. They gave it back to you the way you gave it to them. In a sense, we're saying to Hashem, thank you. I gave you my neshama to watch at night. And in the morning, Hashem gives it back to me. So now, we also have another thing that we're thanking Hashem. There's 2 parts to this. Number one is like we spoke about this last week, just to recognize that all the blessings we have come from Hashem. That's number one. Number 2, part of this is also to teach us very important character traits. One of the things that is found as very important in Torah is the character trait to recognize and acknowledge when someone does me a favor. Someone does a favor to me, I should acknowledge it. Because there are people that you might help, you do something for them, you don't hear anything. And according to Torah, in other words, it's common practice when someone does something, say thank you. So some people say thank you just because it's the way we're speaking. Some people really feel grateful and show gratitude. So in Torah, this is considered a very important character trait, to show gratitude for anything that a person does for me. And therefore, we show gratitude to Hashem. When we express gratitude, thank you for giving me back my neshama. Now, this lesson is considered that this is really behind all the brachas we make. Like when we eat food, we'll learn about this later. You'll learn about this in the halacha class. Why do you have to make a blessing before you drink water? So one explanation is because everything belongs to Hashem, and drinking a blessing is like asking Hashem permission, can I have the water? That's one explanation. The other explanation is it's basically thanking Hashem, showing gratitude to Hashem for giving me water. In the Chumash, when you read the story of creation, so this is, we know there are 5 books in the Torah, and the first book is the book of Genesis, the book of creation. And in that book, the first parsha, we already have this lesson. When we know the story that Hashem told Adam, the first man and first woman, that they're not allowed to eat from the tree, Eitz Hadas. What happened was the story with the snake, the serpent that convinced Chava to eat from the tree, and then she convinced her husband. So when Hashem said to Adam, tell me, did you eat from that tree that I told you not to eat from? So his reaction was that this woman that you gave me, she convinced me to eat from the tree. So the Gemara says this was his first mistake was that he ate from the tree. The second thing wrong that what he did was Hashem gave him a partner in life. Hashem gave him a gift. What does he say to Hashem? Almost like it's your fault. You gave me this woman and she's the one who convinced me to do something wrong. So the Gemara says he did what's called in Hebrew, we'll learn more about it in Pirkei Avos, kafui toiva, which means someone who does not show gratitude for a favor. On the contrary, almost turns it into what you did to me as a favor. Actually, that's what made the problem. So we see that recognizing a favor that someone does and acknowledging it and showing gratitude is a very basic part of Torah. When we get to Pirkei Avos, which is learning about character traits, we'll talk about this in more length. Now, you're also supposed to wash your hands in the morning when you wake up. When do we wash our hands? Before we say this first prayer or after we say the prayer? After. So that raises a little bit of a question. Generally speaking, washing our hands is a form of purification. It would make sense. First of all, let's find out why do we wash our hands altogether. And then after that will come the next question, why do we wash it after, not before? So there are 2 reasons why we wash our hands in the morning. One reason is that when a person is sleeping, the hands are always moving around, even in our sleep. And therefore we might touch certain parts of our bodies that when you touch those parts of the bodies, you need to wash your hands. So that's why we wash our hands before we start the day. The other reason that's given is that just like, God forbid, we said before that sleeping is like a 60th of the opposite of life. So just like when a person passes away, the body has a certain presence of impurity. As long as the soul is in the body, then this sort of impure presence won't be there. The soul will protect it. Once the soul leaves the body, then there's an impurity that rests on the body, and that's why that body is impure. When a person sleeps, they're alive, but being that the soul is sort of less connected to the body now, so it allows that impurity to rest on the body. When it wakes up, the impurity goes away. Even though it goes away from the entire body, but it still remains on one part of the body, which are the hands. And that's why we wash our hands in the morning. Of course, this is not the place to go into it. Why do we wash it 3 times on this hand and 3 times on that hand? Maybe at another opportunity. There's a lot of explanations in Chassidus for that, but that's the washing of the hands. The question I do want to address is, if that's the case, it would make more sense that the washing of the hands should be before we say this prayer. I'm saying a prayer, and I'm going to speak to Hashem. Wouldn't it make sense? First, wash my hands, sort of take away the impurity, and then daven. And the answer that's given is because Hashem's name is not mentioned here, so it doesn't really matter so much. In a lot of prayers, you actually pronounce Hashem's name. Here you don't. You just say, thank you, I'm thanking you, but you're not spelling out Hashem's name like in other blessings. And therefore, it could be pronounced and it could be recited even with hands that are impure. But the question is, of course, it could be, but wouldn't it be better to recite it with pure hands? Why isn't the custom the reverse? First thing in the morning I do is wash my hands, and then I say Modani. So the answer that's given is that I actually prepared a copy and left it downstairs. So I'll get it to you some other time in a different class maybe. But the answer that's given is that there are different dimensions of depth to the soul. In fact, it says that there are 5 dimensions of depth, 5 layers of depth to the soul. And the deepest part of the soul, which is called the essence of the soul, or sometimes it's called Yechida, that's the part of the soul that always remains untouched. In other words, when a person commits a sin, it causes a certain stain on the neshama, causes a certain spiritual damage to the soul. Just like physically, if I eat food that's not good, if I eat something which is spoiled, I eat something that I'm allergic to, it does damage to the body. So too, there are certain things that they do damage to the neshama, to the soul. And that's why Hashem told us not to do these averas. They do damage to the soul. Nevertheless, there's one part of the soul, which is the essence of the neshama, that part of the soul, there's nothing in the world that can affect it, that can damage it, that can hurt it. It always remains connected to Hashem, and it always remains pure. So in fact, this is the reason why, there's a lot to be talked about, and I'm sure you learned about this or heard about this in different Hasidic classes, that this is the reason why halachically, no matter what a Jew does, even if a Jew would convert to another religion, they don't lose their Jewish identity. On the surface, it's a little bit hard to understand, because if someone comes along and says, I don't want any part of this, and I don't want to be associated with this, I don't want to identify as a Jew anymore, why would the Torah say, no, you can't? Why not? In any country, if someone's a citizen of a country, and he says, I hate this country, and I want to undo my citizenship, the country wouldn't even want them to be a citizen. In fact, there are laws that if you, for example, join the army of another country, not all countries, but certain countries, you lose your citizenship. Because how could you be loyal to America if you are being part of an army of another country, or even part of the government of another country? Remember, there was a famous person who was in Israel. You can have dual citizenship. You can be Israeli and American at the same time. This is an American person that went to Israel, and he was involved politically, and then they wanted to vote him in to become part of the Knesset. Part of the Knesset, he'd have to give up her American citizenship. Why? You can't be totally loyal and faithful to this country if you're part of the government of another country. So if a person says, I don't want to be Jewish, I don't want to have anything to do with it, what if a person goes as far as converting to another religion? Why would halacha say that you're still Jewish? So the answer is because there's a part of the neshama, part of the soul, which is the essence of the soul, that part of the soul has a burning love for Hashem and for Torah. We're not conscious of it, we don't feel it, but that part of the soul can never be affected, no matter what we do. And therefore, because of that, it doesn't really matter. Even if a person would have 10 pounds of impurity, that part of the soul does not become impure. Because that's the essence. I'm just trying to think, to compare it to something. If you have fire and you pour water on it, the water extinguishes the fire. There's a stone, we call it a flint stone, that you strike it with a piece of metal and a spark comes out and you have fire. What if you pour water on the stone? What if this stone is going to be in the ocean for 1,000 years, soaking in the water? When you take it out, you strike it, you'll have fire again. That fire is like into the essence of the stone, and it can be destroyed. So when we wake up in the morning, being that this is the beginning of the day, in a certain sense, it's the essence of the day, it corresponds to that part of the soul, which is the essence of the soul. So we specifically and deliberately say this prayer before we wash our hands to show that there's no impurity in the world that can affect this part of my neshama. And that's why I could say it even with hands that are totally impure. I always think of this story of this. Actually, she wasn't a student, but she came here. Someone who was a student recommended that she speak to me about something, and she told me that she grew up all her life thinking that she's not Jewish, and she only found out that she's Jewish at age 23. And how did she find out? Because she was talking to a relative who said that this relative was killed by the Nazis. So she asked her, why would the Nazis want to kill her? He said, because she was Jewish. Then she said, but if she was Jewish, that makes this and this aunt Jewish. True. But if that aunt is Jewish, that would make my grandparents Jewish or my parents Jewish. True. So what, we're Jewish? So he said, I don't know, speak to your parents about it. She went home. Her parents wouldn't talk to her for 6 months. They didn't want to talk about it. So at the end, she found out that they are Jewish. And 3 generations back, the grandmother already converted to another religion. She actually founded a church. And it was a family secret they shouldn't even know. And they grew up amongst non-Jews. She grew up with all sorts of anti-Semitic jokes. She even told me one joke, which I wouldn't even repeat because it was so horrible. But what do you think would be the reaction if a girl who grew up non-Jewish, had all friends that were non-Jews, had people who had an anti-Semitic attitude to Jews, and now she finds out she's Jewish? You would think the reaction would be like, my bad luck. Instead, the reaction was to her parents, you had no right to hide this from me. Why didn't you tell me? And then she and her brother went off to Israel and did more research and wanted to know what it means to be Jewish. And that's how they got involved in Yiddishkeit. So how do you explain to someone that the grandmother, the parents, they were brought up totally not Jewish, and yet when she finds out there's something inside, you can't explain it psychologically, emotionally, scientifically. The only explanation is spiritually, that there's something in the soul that's always alive, you can't extinguish it. And if there's something that triggers that and it comes out, it's going to be, that's the part of the neshama that can never be extinguished. And that's what we are conscious of when we say Moeda'ani. Okay? So now let's move. The next thing we do is we wash our hands and we make a blessing. The blessing is, blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the washing of our hands. So first I want to explain that there's a question here. Washing your hands is not one of the commandments. In the Torah, there's 613 commandments. Are you familiar with the fact that there's commandments that are in the Torah, and then there's things that the rabbis instituted, right? So washing our hands is not in the Torah. That's one of the things the rabbis instituted. And yet we make the blessing, we say, thank you, Hashem, that you sanctified us with your commandments, and you commanded us to wash our hands. A similar thing would be lighting Friday night candles, Shabbos candles. It's also a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah that the rabbis instituted. But we say, thank you, Hashem, for sanctifying us with your commandments, and you commanded us to light the candles. And I think I mentioned the other day about Hanukkah and Purim. When we light the Hanukkah candle, we also say, you sanctified us and commanded us to light the Shabbos candles, a Hanukkah candle. Hanukkah came about over 1,000 years after the Torah was given. It's not in the Chumash anywhere. It's the rabbis instituted after the miracle of Hanukkah. And the rabbis instituted to read the Megillah after the miracle of Purim. So the answer is, actually last week's portion was the source where it says that there's a commandment to listen to whatever the sages tell us to do. So when we follow the sages, we're basically observing a commandment where Hashem said to us that we're commanded to follow what the sages tell us to do. So if that's the case, lighting the candles for Shabbos, washing our hands here, or washing our hands for bread, or all other things that the rabbis told us to do is considered fulfilling Hashem's command. That's number one. Number two, what does it mean when we say, blessed are you, Hashem? We are blessing Hashem. How does that make sense? He's basically the creator of the universe. He's the source of all blessings. So what does it mean we're blessing him? And yet it's all over in the davening, blessed are you, Hashem, blessed are you, Hashem. What does that mean? So the answer is, generally speaking, I'll give you two answers. One answer which is explained on the surface level, and then a little bit of a deeper answer. On the surface level, whenever we say these words, Baruch Ata Hashem, blessed be you, Hashem, what we mean to say is similar to what we said before. Hashem, I feel gratitude to you, and I thank you for everything you did for me. I praise you and thank you for what you do for me. So therefore, whether it's Hashem giving me the opportunity to eat food, or gives me the opportunity to observe mitzvahs, I'm thanking him. And that's really what the word baruch. When we say blessed, we don't mean I'm giving him a blessing. That's ludicrous. How could I give him a blessing? He's the source of life. He's the source of everything. But it means I'm thanking and acknowledging and showing gratitude for what you did for me. What's the deeper explanation? The deeper explanation, which will come up a lot in classes of Sichos or Chassidus, is that the word Baruch in Hebrew also has another interpretation. And it could mean to bring something down. Like there are places where it says if there is a tree, you want to bring down the branches, we'll use the word Baruch. But there's another place in Chumash where it says they had a camel and the camel nailed down, was brought down. You know how camels go down to the ground. What does that mean? It means that when we make a bracha, and the purpose of making a bracha is to draw down Hashem's presence, whether it's in the water, whether it's in the food, whether it's in whatever it is that I'm doing, the mitzvah that I'm doing. So the deeper meaning of the word baruch is not I'm blessing Hashem, I'm drawing down Hashem's presence, Hashem's light into the thing that I am doing. And that's the deeper part of a mitzvah. The whole idea of mitzvahs is really to bring Hashem into this world. That's in general. In particular, each mitzvah that I do brings Hashem into a different place. So when I light the Shabbos candles, it brings Hashem into the dining room, into the candles that I lit. And when I wash my hands, I'm bringing Hashem into my body, specifically my hands. And all the brachas that we make is, as Masul will explain in more detail. For example, we make a bracha, thank you Hashem for giving me vision, giving me eyesight. On one hand, we're thanking Hashem for giving the eyesight. It also means Baruch, I'm drawing down God's energy and God's blessing to give us this, that He should give us, that His presence will bring us the blessing of eyesight. I just want to add that in today's day and age, with technology, you can relate to the idea a little bit more. When we say that when you say the blessing just by speaking, you draw down Hashem's presence. Today, when you speak, you can make things happen. Right? If you're, there's so many things that they're sort of speech activated, so many computers, you talk on the phone, you're talking, someone's answering you, you're having a conversation. But I want to give an example of something exactly like this. Imagine you're standing in front of an elevator and you no longer have to press buttons, you just have to speak. And you say down, what happens? There's an elevator on the 10th floor. Because I said the word down, it comes down. It's not so simple. It's not going to work if I walk over to this door and say down. It works because there's a whole mechanism here and electricity and whatever else, and that's all set and prepared. And now all I need to do is just say the word down, and that elevator comes down from the 10th floor to the first floor. Spiritually, it's the same thing. There's a spiritual network and a spiritual mechanism that Hashem set up in this world. And when we say these blessings or when we pronounce these words, we're drawing down Hashem's light upon ourselves. So normally we associate Hashem's presence with a shul, with a Beis Hamikdash, with a temple. So the truth is, yes, over there it's in a much greater measure. But the truth is, every one of us in our own home, by lighting Shabbos candles, by making a bracha, by washing my hands, doing all these things, we're bringing a certain presence of Hashem into our lives and into our bodies and into the physical objects that we're using. And that's the definition of the word baruch. Okay, now the day starts that we're thanking Hashem for our basic needs. And when we say this, we're doing two things. When we make a bracha, it really is, number one, thanking Hashem for the past. Number two, asking Hashem to continue giving me this blessing for the future. Because some people ask, so I make a blessing, and the next blessing is person goes to the bathroom, and I thank Hashem that I'm able to do, my body is functioning normally. I remember a number of years ago, someone wrote an article that when he was in yeshiva, he was a little bit of a mischievous guy. One of the things that he did was usually make fun of this blessing because it's connected to a bathroom. So it was like something to make fun of. Now he's writing this article. He's in his mid-40s, I think. And unfortunately, something happened. He was not well. He was in the hospital because his bodily functioning was not working. And he suffered for a very long time. He needed to have surgery until everything went back to normal. And he says, now when I make this blessing, I think I have more intention when I make this blessing than any other blessing that I make. Because he suffered, and now his body is functioning properly. He can go to the bathroom like a normal human being. So he writes the article. The reason is that people shouldn't take this blessing lightly. It's a blessing, and it's a big blessing. And we have to thank Hashem that every part of our body is functioning. The next blessing starts off with the words Elokai Neshama. This is the bottom of the page. God, the soul that you gave me is pure. You created it, you formed it, and you blew it into me, you breathed it into me, and you preserve it with me. So here too, in Chassidus, it explains that the soul comes from a very high place spiritually, and the soul descends and goes into our body. So if you notice, this is implying the four levels of the soul's sort of travel. When we say the soul is pure, that's the fourth world, called Atzilus, the highest world. When we say you created it, Barasa, that's the world of Bria. When we say Ata Yitzarta, you formed it, that's the world of Yitzira. Then we say Ata Nafachta, you blew it into me, that's here in this physical world. And that you, Hashem, protect me, preserve the soul within me, that I should be alive and well and fine. Are you familiar with the four worlds that I just mentioned? Because that's in the beginning of Tanya. Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, no, you'll learn about it. Which means that when things evolve from the spiritual realm to the physical realm, they go through four stages, four worlds. And one is called Atzilus, one is called Bria, one is called Yitzira, and these are the four terms that you see here. So why these, there's 18 blessings here, why these blessings? So apparently the rabbis saw that these 18 blessings are not just 18 things excluding everything else, they're 18 blessings that include all the needs of a person, which means anything else you can think of would probably be a you would say a branch of one of these 18 things. So the first bracha, Let's start. It's on page 6. First bracha is we thank Hashem for the rooster and gave him the understanding to distinguish between day and night. Of course, what this is referring to is that years ago, the rooster was the alarm clock. And when the day started, when they broke, when it was, sunrise or whenever the light started to shine, then the rooster would begin making his cantorial pieces, and that way he woke us up. So even though we don't have roosters today, but in a sense, again, there's a deeper meaning to these words, that just like the rooster has in it the wisdom that Hashem gave it. Of course, with the rooster, it's more instinct, but the rooster recognized the difference between day and night. Up until now was night, and now is day. So we too thank Hashem that He should give us the understanding to distinguish between day and night, which also could mean, in a broader definition, between positive and negative. Things that are dark and things that are bright light. Very often, the real challenge in life is not so much to choose positive over the negative, but it's more to recognize what is positive and what is negative. A lot of times things that are negative appear to be positive. We very often hear people supporting and arguing different points to support things that are negative, and it's really, and they think that it's positive. So the real wisdom that we need is to be able to know to be able to define things clearly, what is positive and what is negative. And we thank Hashem to give us that wisdom that we should be able to know the difference. A lot of times, the things that are not good could look like it's a positive thing. And that's why there are so many people that do it. But in essence, it's negative, and we need the wisdom to make that distinction, that recognition. The second bracha is we thank Hashem who opens the eyes of the blind, which means at night we don't see. In fact, you can say that the main difference between sleeping and being awake are in the eyes. Where do you recognize whether a person's awake or sleeping? The hands are the same, the legs are the same, the whole body, everything is the same. The difference is in the eyes. If the eyes are closed, they're probably sleeping. If their eyes are open, you know that they're awake. So we thank Hashem that He gives us healthy eyes and we have the ability to see. Because, God forbid, a person who can't see, it's a major blessing in life that they're missing. Here again, you have the literal, limited, narrow definition, and you can also have a broader definition of seeing. And that is, there's also the eyes, which are the physical eyes, and there's the eyes of the mind. That we should be able to see with our eyes what's the right direction to go. Some people have eyes, physical eyes, but they don't have the eyes to see where they're going, what they're doing, whatever it is that they're doing is being destructive or it's against Hashem. So basically, this is a bracha, this is a prayer that we're asking for both. Number one, to have the eyes in the physical sense, to see what needs to be done, to see properly. Like a child, for example, the child could look at a diamond and throw it in the garbage because the child doesn't understand that this is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they're seeing with their physical eyes, but they're not seeing with their eyes of the mind. Or a child could see something that is actually dangerous, it might be poison. So physically he sees what it is and doesn't see any problem with it. But if you would look at it with the eyes of the mind, you realize, wow, this is something poisonous. You have to stay away from it. So we need both blessings. Which the eyes, which are the physical eyes, should be healthy, and the eyes of the mind should be healthy. They should be able to see things in the proper way. The next bracha is thank you Hashem, who releases those that are bound. What does that mean? When a person wakes up in the morning, all our bones are like, you need to stretch because everything got contracted, so everything is stuck together. So people stretch in the morning and just to flex your body, your muscles, and that's the bracha, to be able to have the freedom of movement with your hands and your legs and every part of your body. I once went to a doctor who was an osteopath. Osteopaths, these are people that work with the spine. He wasn't Jewish. When I met him, he was already semi-retired, and he practiced for like 55 years. So, and he also taught. So he told the students that if you don't believe in God, you're just not in touch with reality. He said, for example, in my field, I'm a doctor, and I deal with the spine. And said the vertebrae in the spine and the way the spine is made, if things would have been a little bit off, like even a hairline, something would be more softer than it is, you couldn't make this movement. If it would be a little bit harder than it is, you couldn't do that movement. If this would be different, you couldn't move to the right, you couldn't move to the left. So we have Hashem's blessing that we can have the flexibility with our hands, flexibility with our legs, flexibility with our spine, our whole body. And that freedom is a big blessing. That's what we thank Hashem for. That's a simple meaning. What could be a deeper meaning? It says that sometimes, we have a Yetzer Hara, and sometimes a person is as if he's bound. What does it mean, bound? Bound would mean a person that they're alive, they're well, they're intelligent, but someone took ropes and tied them up. They can't do what they really want to do. So sometimes the Yetzer Hara gets to us in such a way that it's almost like, just like physically, there are things which are called an addiction. You know what addiction is? Addiction? Yeah? Yeah. So it means I know I shouldn't be drinking this or I shouldn't be eating this, but I can't help myself. That's called bound. And the same thing comes down to be spiritually. There's certain people they don't know. They don't know about Shabbos, they don't know about kashrus, they don't know about Hashem, and they live their life the way they live. Sometimes the person that knows that this is something which is wrong, they know even the consequences. Not to compare, but let's say people who are trying to go on a diet. They know that this is going to cause me to gain weight. And yet when they're sitting at the table right in front of the food, they just eat it. Why are you eating it? One time it's not going to be so bad. 2 times won't be bad. Which means basically they're like addicted to it. They can't let go. People are addicted to their cell phones. I'm not talking about real addictions, addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol. That's a little bit something more, But addicted means that you're connected to it. Now here we're not talking about addiction in a clinical way, just that we could be bound to our desires and not being able to let go. So we ask Hashem for a bracha, and we thank Him for the bracha that we have that freedom to be able to disconnect and not be bound. And when I recognize that something is wrong, I'm able to let go and do whatever is the right thing to choose to do. We have time for one more bracha. Zoikev Kefufim. Thank you, Hashem, for straightening out. So this, by the way, it's interesting. I didn't mention this. Years ago, the custom was not the way we do it today, but people would make the bracha as things happen. In other words, when they heard the rooster, they made that bracha. When they opened their eyes, they made the next bracha. When they sat up, they made this bracha. Hashem, when I stretched in bed, I made the bracha, thank you for not being bound. When I sat up straight, I made the bracha, thank you Hashem for making me ability to be straight. When I put on my clothes, I made it. Now we don't do that. We get dressed, we wash up, we get ready, and then we go and we make all the blessings. But then they did it as they went along. So being straight, being able to, Hashem will straightens out those that are bound, means that we're able to be upright. And again, one of the things that the way this is understood again in a more a spiritual, a deeper meaning would be the difference between animals and humans. Humans stand straight, and animals are on four legs, so they're bent. The difference between the two is that when you're on four legs and your body is bent, you only see the earth. When you stand straight, you see the earth and you see the heaven. So in another way, this is also thanking Hashem that we have the ability to see, heaven, not just earth, which means not just materialism. And to be more specific, it means that everything we're involved with, we should be able to see heaven in it. Whether it's business, whether it's relationship, wherever we're involved, we should be able to see the spiritual sort of feature that's there, the spiritual element that's there to give it, to have more depth. So if a person, for example, is at work and it's a very successful day, being not able to see the heaven would mean I would attribute my success because I'm very smart and I made the right investment and I knew what I was doing and I did everything right. Seeing the heaven means that I recognize that this was Hashem that gave me this blessing. And he arranged that this customer walk into the store and I was just there in the right time, in the right moment, made a good deal, and I made a lot of money. And then what do I do with my money? So again, a person who just looks at they once asked, he was a wealthy man, his name was Mr. Stone, and he was a very big philanthropist, gave a lot of tzedakah. So they asked him, why do you give away so much money for tzedakah? So he said, how many meals a day can I eat? In other words, he had wealth, which is a big blessing, but he saw in it also something heavenly, that it's from Hashem, and I could use it in a way where it's going to help other people physically, other people spiritually, help children, help families, help people that are in need, which means that I could look at things and just see the earth in it, just see the materialistic part of it, or I could see the heavenly part in it, and that's another form of blessing. No, I think this class goes to 11:25, right? Yeah? Okay, so we'll do one more bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam malbish harumim, gives us clothing. So we know clothing allows a person to be presented in a dignified way. Clothing protects us when it's cold. Clothing protects us when there's something like the sun is too intense, and the clothing protects us from that. So generally speaking, of course, it's an ordinary blessing. But when you study Chassidus, when you start Tanya, you'll come across to understand that the soul also has clothing. Soul has garments. You ever learned that about the three garments of the soul? Thought, speech, and action. Right. And why is it called clothing? Because the clothing is something external. It's not really me. Usually, from the clothing that the person wears, you can have some idea about the person. First of all, if they're wearing a uniform of a policeman, it's probably a policeman. If they're wearing the uniform of a fireman, it's probably a fireman. If he's wearing this kind of clothes, it's probably this kind of person. Also, you can tell from the style of clothing, how they dress, a little bit about their personality. But after everything's said and done, it's still external. It's not really who the person is. It's just clothing. I can actually change my clothing. The spy could be wearing the clothing of an enemy, and he's really, not only is not part of them, but he's actually against them. So clothing is external. And same thing spiritually. The internal part of the neshama is the thought, is really understanding and feeling, intellect and emotion. Thought, speech, and action are called garments of the soul. This is the part of the soul through which we can communicate. This is the part of the soul through which we can express things outwardly, and also the part of the soul where we can import things from outside into us through thought, through speech, and through action. So we thank Hashem for both, for giving us the opportunity to have clothing in the physical sense, and for giving us the opportunity to be able to do things, think, and because according to Torah, what really counts more than anything else is thought, speech, and action. Even if a person doesn't feel 100%, but if they do the right thing and they speak the right way and do the right things, so let's say there's someone that you're upset with, but you don't verbally abuse them, verbally put them down, verbally insult them, embarrass them, and you say, you speak in a decent way, you have done the right thing. Even though inside you might be, your blood is boiling, but what counts is mainly thought, speech, and action to do the right thing. Okay, to be continued. So either next week we'll do this or we'll start the Machzor on Rosh Hashanah. So when you go to Shul, we'll be more familiar.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome.